My name is Matthew Stepp. I'm a senior analyst at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. We're a science and technology policy think tank here in DC. And this is the last, but probably not the least for now, of a series of briefings that we've been holding with innovation associates as well as the House Technology Transfer Caucus on issues related to tech transfer. In December, we held a number of meetings on similar briefings on issues such as SBIR reform as well as national lab reform. And the goal of these briefings is to highlight the importance of addressing all of these issues as well as sharing best practices from experts in the field as well as potential opportunities for reforms. So today's briefing is on university industry R&D partnerships and their importance to moving university research into the marketplace. From ITIS point of view, this is important, namely because university research is just fundamental to the U.S. innovation ecosystem. ITIF tallied that in 2011, which is the last year of data, the U.S. invested roughly $45 billion in university R&D, the U.S. government, which is about 0.3% of GDP. But we also recognize that just investing in university R&D by itself is not necessarily enough, and that you also need to be focusing on investments and reforms that turn that R&D into actual new products and services, particularly in such a globally intense economy. So I'm going to move this over to Joe Allen, who's the moderator of the panel, and we'll dive into this, and then we'll pause when the Congressman steps in. Joe Allen is, I couldn't think of anybody better to host and lead the discussion of this panel. Joe spent the majority of his career promoting and formulating public-private commercialization partnerships. He was the lead staff member in Congress that for the famed Bayh-Dole Act, which is, I think, widely recognized across the world as a landmark piece of legislation on technology transfer. He's also been the Director of Technology Commercialization at the Department of Commerce, as well as the President of the National Tech Transfer Center. I think just the sheer weight of knowledge that Joe has on this issue could crush this building. So I'm very excited to have him host this panel. And Joe, I'll give it to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you. Should we use the microphone or can you hear us okay? Is that good?
Use the mic. Use the mic.
How about that? Is that better?
Yeah.
I got to tell you, as a former Senate staffer, sitting up here with a gavel is like my dream come true. So I will clear this meeting room if we need to. I hope this new Facebook pictures, me with this gavel. I wish my mom could see me now. She would think, what in the world has happened to our country? As Matt said, maximizing the impact of our university industry R&D partnerships is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Where the U.S. once had clear dominance funding university research and integrating the results into our economy, other countries are rapidly closing the gap. The winners of this race will develop the products that drive the 21st century world economy. Our friends at ITIF had an excellent study published last month, which found that university research is critical to our economy as the private sector has largely abandoned basic research. Yet this is precisely where breakthrough discoveries creating new industries like biotechnology will occur. As Matt said, the government is the largest source of academic research. It's funding about $40 billion annually. But the government's funding research for two reasons, either to expand fundamental knowledge or to meet agency mission. The resulting inventions are normally very early stage and can only move from the lab to the marketplace when the private sector is willing to undertake significant risk and expense. And a lot of times that's sort of glanced over. But typically it takes from 5 to 7 years of industry-funded development for this to happen. In the case of a new drug, double the time and add at least $1 billion. Our challenge is to make sure we do everything we can to encourage these partnerships to reap the greatest benefits for the American taxpayer, who in fact are funding all this effort. And we've already come a long way. Before 1980, the government usually took inventions away from universities and small companies, which destroyed the incentive for development. As a result, the General Accounting Office found we had 28,000 inventions gathering dust with not a single new drug having been commercialized. With the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act, this changed. An economic impact analysis of university patent licensing found it contributed as much as $836 billion with a B to the U.S. gross domestic product and supported 3 million jobs between 1996 and 2010. To keep that in perspective, that's also about 200,000 jobs a year. Last month, as you remember, the whole U.S. economy only created 74,000 jobs 40% of which are estimated to be low-wage jobs. So clearly, academic commercialization is a driving force of our economy. Annual sales from products-based on university licensed inventions is estimated at $110 billion in 2012. That's more than twice the amount the government spent on academic research. And again, for perspective, net farm income for the same year was $122 billion. So again, these are big boy numbers. We have more than 4,000 university spin-out companies now operating. 700 were formed in 2012 alone. That's a 5% increase over the preceding year. We talked about there was not a single drug commercialized when the government took inventions away before by Dole. There are now 153 new drugs and vaccines fighting disease worldwide because of commercialized federally funded inventions. These drugs receive FDA high priority reviews. They're awarded to those new drug applications deemed to have the highest therapeutic value at twice the rate of inventions coming from any other source. I have an article today in today's IP Watchdog called "Does University Patent Licensing Pay Off?" which discusses all this in more detail. While we've certainly made progress in forming successful partnerships, we can't afford to stand still. The ITIF report reminds us that other countries are now supporting fundamental research at much greater rates in the United States. The White House Lab to Market Summit, which Diane Palmer and I co-chaired last year, said we've got to renew our commitment to maximize the return on investment from federally funded research at a time when our economy is stuck in the doldrums. So today we'll talk about how to move forward. When putting together our panel, we invited speakers with real hands-on experience in forming university industry partnerships. Each speaker will give a quick 5-minute opening statement to frame the issue, and then we'll devote the remainder of our time to talking with you and taking your questions. We're delighted you took the time to meet with us today. And one last thing, please turn off your cell phones. If you don't, we'll say no more. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Our first speaker is Dr. Paul Sandberg. Paul is the president of the National Academy of Inventors and the senior vice president for research and innovation at the University of South Florida. Paul?
Thanks. I guess those out there who want to come sit in.
Yeah, please. There's plenty of seats up here. Come on up. If you want to be a witness, you can stand up there.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you. I want to thank the ITIF as well for holding these, and of course Congressman Bilirakis, who will be here in a little bit, for the Tech Transfer Caucus, and Joe, thank you for inviting me as well, and my colleagues. Actually, what's interesting is, can't hear me very well? All right. It's because I'm cold. Actually, what's interesting is that here on my right, including myself, we're the Florida delegation. And we're all shivering up here. But they put us over the side.
We're telling this builds character, so those of you from the East Coast, and they live in Florida. After this, they don't have to be up here, so don't feel too sorry for them.
Right. Anyways, thank you. So what Joe asked us to do was to introduce ourselves and give a bit of what our background is so that we can give perspectives as we get into the question and answer period, the discussion. So I'm here, I think, really, there's Congressman Bilirakis. Perhaps I can relinquish.
You know, you probably deserve this microphone more than I do.
Oh, no, wherever you're going, you want to get your seat.
No, I don't care.
This is fine. How about you? This is good. Well, thank you very much for being here. This is very exciting. Thanks for attending today. It was a great crowd. I have some prepared remarks. Technology transfer is an important issue, as you know, especially given the current budgetary and fiscal climate. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to co-chair this with my very good friend, Ray Luján. We work on a lot of pieces of legislation together, and he's a great guy. I actually got to know him on the Codell. We went to to Iraq and Afghanistan, and we have a lot of things in common. I'd like to begin, of course, by thanking the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation and Innovation Associates, as well as Matthew Stepp, for helping to host and organize this briefing. Our panelists today will discuss the need to bolster the partnerships between the industries and universities, especially as it relates to R&D. I'd like to especially welcome Dr. Paul Sandberg, the Senior VP for Research and Innovation at the University of South Florida, one of the best universities in the state of Florida. I had the honor of being an adjunct teacher at the University of South Florida at the Honors College. I'm enjoying it very much. It's located in the Tampa Bay area, just south of my congressional district. USF was ranked by the Intellectual Property Office in the top 10 universities and top 300 organizations for U.S. patents. USF has made significant contributions to tech transfer, and I'm pleased that Dr. Sandberg was able to join us here today. As I mentioned, the federal dollars are scarce. Washington must be smarter with every dollar it spends, and it must take the dollars, make them grow. So further, and this is just such a wonderful idea, and I'm so proud to be part of the, and I can see that there's so much interest here as we have a great turnout today. Some of the best investments, in spite of this very cold weather, some of the best investments the federal government makes are its tech transfer programs, like the Small Business Technology Transfer and the Small Business Innovation Research. Companies are in business to make money, as we know. Oftentimes, it is not cost effective for business to do so, to do R&D. And the R&D gap is something that national labs and universities can fill. Makes so much sense. Furthermore, getting new technologies onto the market is vital for the American economy, in my opinion. America has thrived when its people are a nation of doers and makers. Manufacturing and the creation and exportation of goods and services are cruxes of a healthy, prosperous economy and people. Technology transfer and the role our universities play in the development of marketable development of the profitable technologies cannot be understated. I look forward to continuing my work as co-chair of the Technology Transfer Caucus, and again, thank you for coming here today. Please let me and my staff know if we can ever help you and be a resource to you as we look to grow this vital sector of our economy. Again, thank you very much for being here today. I'm very excited about this. I want you to play a very active role in this area, and look forward to listening to our great speakers here on the panel, even though I know I have to go to the caucus in a few minutes, and then we have a markup at ENC, and I have a hearing at the VA going on at the same time. But this is very, very exciting, and I appreciate you allowing me to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership, and thank you very much for the caucus inviting us here. If you don't know it, you can imagine how much a schedule a congressman has, so for you to take the time to come in here, we really appreciate. And those are excellent remarks, and we'll be happy to do anything we can to help you in the caucus. For the folks that are back there, you can please come up here. We're not going to have witnesses, so please turn these chairs around. Come on up. Don't be shy. We're not going to swear you in or anything. Turn these chairs around. You can sit up here or anywhere you want. I'll go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thanks. So, Congressman, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for what you're doing to help boost tech transfer in universities nationwide.
I look forward to working.
As Joe said, we should do 5 minutes to who we are and what roles we play and how we can contribute in this discussion as we get a little more deeper into it. And I think what we're seeing in the panel here is a wide variety of expertise to really deal with this issue. I come in a few different roles. One is as an inventor for many years in the life sciences and medical field, and have taken things from federal dollars in grants from basic science to patents, to transferring the technology of those patents into startup companies, or originally it was existing companies, and then I got courage to do startup companies, and then taking that and taking those into clinical trials, and eventually doing a number of things with those in a number of different areas, whether it be cell therapy, drug therapy, or dietary supplements. In fact, some of the stuff that we have is, I think you have Kroger's up here around the markets of Kroger's, for example. I think what's of interest is really how, from my perspective, is what will the issues raised in tech transfer right now in the government do to inventors at universities? And that's one perspective I'd like to give. And then as a senior vice president for research and innovation at our university, and now trying to give this kind of, give a lot of honor and credence and really promotion of our faculty and students to get involved in inventing and entrepreneurship, is what risk are we willing to take? What risk are we willing to take with tuition dollars, with state dollars, with federal dollars? We're not a Merck. We don't have a lot of profitable dollars per se. And what risk are we willing to take if some of these bills go through as they are, for example, which we get into discussion, where we might run the risk of not being able to take that risk at a state university, for example, where we have a growing enterprise, not a one that's been around for a long time. So I think that's important. The other is I've been, as you move into phases of your life, the last few years, I really wanted to try to change, with the help of colleagues, to try to change the culture of universities, to really promote entrepreneurship, invention. As an inventor in a university, I can tell you that I got no credit for any of my patents. I would bring in lots of money to the university for my intellectual property, and I got no credit. It was better for me to get a $100,000 grant from the state than it would be for me to bring $1 million in to the university in my products, for example. So to really try to honor and to get those changed, where technology transferring that technology, getting faculty out of the ivory tower, getting them to forget about publishing, perishing completely, and moving into taking their research and taking all this federal dollars that we get. My own university, we get about $450 million or so of dollars. Half of that's about federal. But taking that into technology transfer. So that's really important. And so one of the things we did was we changed the culture in our university by honoring our inventors, encouraging them to teach students how to be entrepreneurs, getting them involved with startup companies, with faculty that are doing things. And that worked really well. It just changed the ecosystem. That's what allowed us to really be a high patenting university for the level we were at. So a lot of my colleagues at other universities thought it was a good idea. We talked to the USPTO at length with David Kapos, who was the undersecretary at the time, and they wanted to start a National Inventors Hall of Fame, or National Academy of Inventors. And so that started. In the last 2.5 years, it's grown incredibly. We have over 100 research universities that are members. We have fellows that we feel are at extremely high level. They've done extraordinary faculty who have done incredible things with innovation. Our new class will be honored at the USPTO by the Commissioner of Patents in March 6th, and we have now about 250 fellows, and we have about 3,000 members now that are university faculty that have issued U.S. patents. They are inventors. They are inventors for this country, and they also do research and are committed to taking their research and moving it out to that. So this is kind of the role that I've tried to play a little more over the last few years with the help of others, and I know Congressman Bilirakis actually has been involved in this and put in a congressional record with the fellows for the National Academy. All these academics that from last year that have achieved such great things in invention. And at the USPTO, the federal office, there's a wall now for these great academics to be displayed every year. So those are the things. I look forward to getting involved in discussion in detail. I think I went over 5 minutes. But thank you.
Thank you. We're going to talk about innovation, so we're going to give extra points to the first person in the alcove that actually sits up here. Please come up here. There's a whole bunch of tables up here. We want you to be comfortable. You were nice enough to come out here. Come on, don't be shy. Come on, sit up here. There you go. Just turn around. This is very informal. This is not a real hearing. Okay, our next speaker is Lisa Cantelo. Lisa is the Chief Executive Officer of the Science and Technology Corporation at the University of New Mexico.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. My background is that I'm an engineer by training, and I worked in industry for about 5 years before entering the technology transfer field in 1982. So it's a long time ago, and I have worked for 5 universities, so I have quite a bit of experience. I started my career in tech transfer at Stanford University, and I worked in Silicon Valley for about 12 years. And I have also worked at Iowa State University, the University of Georgia, Purdue, and now over 10 years I have been at the University of New Mexico. So I've seen models in public, private universities, and various models involving separate corporations inside the university. So I have quite a bit of experience in this field. There are regions, I've also worked in regions where innovation ecosystems are thriving, like Silicon Valley. And I've also worked in regions where they're just developing or really struggling to develop. So with that as a backdrop, I want to make a few comments. First, all regions rely on our universities as drivers of economic development. My current position at the University of New Mexico combines both the tech transfer function and the economic development function. We are currently partnering the university with the city of Albuquerque and the county and the state in building a live, work, play community called Innovate ABQ. And this community will hopefully strengthen our region and our ecosystem. But it's really built on the intellectual capital of our university. This is but one example that's happening around the country and shows that regions are relying on their universities more and more for the economic development. So the marrying of tech transfer and economic development is clearly a trend. Excuse me. Second, I want to comment and say that this work of technology transfer is very challenging. We work very hard to connect the technologies to companies, investors, and entrepreneurs. Most university technologies are so early stage that they're high risk for the entity that takes them on. Many go undeveloped as a result. In the venture capital business, you hear principals talk about maybe 5 or 6 out of any 10 deals that they do will simply fail. Maybe 1 or 2 of those 10 will return capital to the investors. They hope 1 is a big hit. Since university technology transfer is even earlier than a typical venture capital deal, you can imagine that the odds for success are even lower than that. Universities feel fortunate to be able to license 10 or 20% of the technologies that are disclosed to them by their inventors. Now, while that may sound low and kind of depressing, the impact actually is really high, and Joe talked about that a bit in his opening remarks. At the University of New Mexico, for example, we've been starting 5 to 10 companies each year for the past 10 years, and over half of them are still in business. This means hundreds of jobs that have been created in our region with average salaries in the $70,000 to $80,000 range, which is well above jobs that are created through recruiting companies to our region. My third and final comment is that since I've worked in many parts of the country in university tech transfer, people sometimes ask me about what is the right model? What's the best model that can be used to make this all work? Well, I have some bad news. There is no one size fits all for this business. There are some best practices, of course, but models have to be adapted to the unique assets and challenges of the university culture and the region that they're located. Let's be careful not to dictate that what might work for Silicon Valley or for Boston is the right recipe for the rest of the country. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Diane Palmer. Diane is the president of Innovation Associates. She was also the co-chair of the White House Lab to Market Summit, and Innovation Associates is one of our co-sponsors of our event today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I was told this up as this is the recommendations of Lab to Market from the Lab to Market Interagency Summit. You can download that from our website at www.innovationassociates.us. I'd also refer you to two reports that you can also download: Technology Transfer and Commercialization Partnerships, that was supported by NSF, and Accelerating Economic Development through University Tech Transfer. Also, I want to refer you to the fine work that ITIF has done in this area, and the many things that you can download, including November paper, November 2013, that ITIF recently did on university R&D. I'm going to make remarks hopefully very quickly in a couple of different areas. There are some things that that need to be done, that universities need to do themselves, and there are other areas that the federal government can provide incentives and assistance. I'm going to briefly read both of those into my remarks. I want to focus on university startups and broadening the discussion of tech transfer and commercialization to one of enhancing and leveraging university industry partnerships. With regard to startups, over the past decade, startups have increasingly grown as a percentage of commercialization activities. Autumn reports in FY 2012 that over 700 startups were spun off of universities last year. From an economic development standpoint, startups are critically important. They are the lifeblood of economic development in regions. But many universities are ill-equipped to support and assist the creation, and even more so the nurturing of startups. Universities tend to be quite siloed with respect to R&D, tech transfer and commercialization, entrepreneurship, industry relations, and physical facilities such as incubators and science parks. And only a few universities, such as Georgia Tech and also the University of Virginia, I see Mark Crowell here, who directs tech transfer at UVA. Only a few of these universities actually have these various siloed elements that under one umbrella where they are connected, coordinated, and leveraged. There are two areas where I believe that universities fall particularly short. One is early stage and multi-stage capitalization, and the second being development and enhancement of management capacity. Some universities, in terms of capitalization, have started seed funds, angel funding, and more recently, crowdfunding. While this is actually a growing phenomenon in universities, it needs to be in more universities. Acceleration programs, we're now seeing more of those, such as MIT's Deshpande Center, Von Liebig at UCSB, USC Stevens, Venture Lab at Georgia Tech, and the Coulter Foundation that has now funded 16 different universities across the country. Most of these provide small amounts of funding and also usually provide mentors and entrepreneurs and residents to try to mature the research to get them nearer to market stage. But there need to be more of these kinds of programs in universities and not just have these programs in a selected few. And I think that this is where both universities and perhaps the federal government can provide some assistance. I foresee a program that would be perhaps a matching program, a federal and university program that would have more acceleration programs. And this is not to take away from SBIR or STTR programs as has been proposed. Another challenge for university faculty and students is a lack of knowledge and on business development, marketing, and other business and management areas. These are engineers and scientists who start up these companies. These are not business people. And many universities now have developed entrepreneurial courses, workshops, boot camps, etc., which are important. Again, this needs to be done in more universities. At the federal level, we have the NSF I-Corps program that is doing it's a new program, but doing an excellent job at trying to advance entrepreneurial skills of scientists and engineers that work on NSF grants. And I think that this is something that should be considered to be replicated within other agencies as well. In this summit, one of our recommendations was to also utilize more effectively technology translators. Those translators are basically intermediaries such as Innovation Works in Pittsburgh and the Ben Franklin Partnership in Pennsylvania, and the many excellent state technology programs that could be used to help bridge that gap between small startups and financial resources, business and management resources, and potential customers in their areas. Lastly, universities themselves need to provide greater incentives for faculty and students to conduct technology transfer and commercialization in terms of better recognition and tenure, promotion, and related academic achievements. It's important to note that many startups do not go through tech transfer offices. At MIT, for instance, you have about 25 to 30 startups that end up every year going through the tech transfer office, but we know from various studies that MIT actually spins off around 200 plus startups per year. So that is something that we need to keep in mind when developing programs and federal policies as well. I think it also needs to be recognized that innovation does not just happen in major research universities, but also a wide range of universities, and not just these stellar universities such as MIT and Stanford. It also occurs at community colleges such as Springfield in Massachusetts and Moraine Community College in Northeast Ohio. Just make a couple of brief comments about broadening the discussion of university-industry relationships. I think it's very important to note that commercialization is not about IP. I do believe we should have a strong patent system, and I don't think that should be even a question. However, I think that the universities also need to strike a balance themselves in terms of what they decide to patent and license and what they decide to do through more open innovation mechanisms. Saying that commercialization is not about IP, it is about connecting with industry more effectively and developing long-term relationships that are more likely to yield real, substantial, and lasting benefits. And I think this is key. Universities can engage industries in a number of ways, and they're utilizing particularly their alumni through mentorships, industry advisory boards, CEOs and residents. And more recently, a number of universities, such as the University of Akron, have developed joint laboratories. The University of Akron and Timken Industries, for instance, where the researchers work side by side. At the federal level, IUCRCs and ERCs, as part of the National Science Foundation, do an excellent job at bringing together universities and industries, and I think we need to see personally believe in an expanded IUCRC program and need to see this in other agencies as well. Lastly, I'd just like to say that the U.S., in terms of R&D as a portion of GDP, while relatively steady, other countries are moving ahead of us. We now have 4 countries that have greater R&D as a portion of their GDP, and this is growing. So that strong federal support for research is an essential building block for commercialization, and this is critically important. With that, I'll turn to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Our next speaker is Jane York. Jane is the president-elect of the Association of University Technology Managers. She's also the director of the Florida Innovation Hub at the University of Florida and the assistant director of the Office of Technology Licensing.
Hello. So, my name, as you said, is Jamie, and I have been doing technology transfer in the trenches of both federal laboratories and universities for the last 20 years. And I'm here to tell you that it's very difficult, and it takes a long time. And getting these discoveries out of the labs and into the marketplace is fraught with all sorts of nuances that are not readily apparent to someone who is not in the trenches. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Reports that are written that would have you believe that tech transfer folks like me who are working in the trenches stink at what we do. And that in fact the tech transfer system in the United States is broken. That could not be farther from the truth. The fact of the matter is that America has enjoyed huge economic success since the enactment of the Bayh-Dole Act, bipartisan legislation that was passed by Congress in 1980 that gave the universities the ability to patent these new discoveries and economic incentive to get them into the market as products. The law has been so successful here in the United States that there are now 30 other countries who have enacted similar legislation in order to replicate the successes that we've had here. In fact, in the next 5 months, I will be going to 5 other countries to talk to them about best practices in the United States. Because truth of the matter is that the legacy of American technology transfer is millions of jobs and billions of dollars that have been contributed to the economy here in the United States. In the wake of some of these erroneous reports, many of you have considered legislation to make the system work better. While I applaud your efforts and certainly welcome your desire to help, I implore you, please work with practitioners, people who understand the many nuances of our profession, to make sure that in fact any legislation that you enact will indeed facilitate technology transfer rather than cripple it, that it will strengthen the patent system rather than break it. An example of some of the positive legislation is the Transfer Act that the House Science Committee recently approved, which would allow agencies to use some of the money that they already have for proof of concept funds to move some of these early stage technologies along. Now, is there room for improvement in the technology transfer system? Absolutely. One such opportunity would be to figure out how to allocate additional resources for translational research. You see, at the University of Florida, we get over 300 new discoveries disclosed to our office every year, and 99% of them require additional development. And in fact, that's also true for the 24,000 disclosures that were submitted to U.S. institutions in 2012 alone. Another factor to make sure we consider is that we need to have strong patents that can be developed by startups and existing companies when they're licensing these technologies. Without strong patent protection, it's extremely difficult to get investors or corporations to make the necessary investment. That is also why we have concerns about the recently passed House legislation that attempts to cramp down on the so-called patent trolls. We remain concerned that legislation will make enforcement of legitimate patents much more difficult in its zest to clamp down on these trolls. We're working hard with the Senate to create legislation that will deal effectively with the trolls, but still maintain the ability of legitimate patent holders to defend their patents in court. Oftentimes, an investment is required to enable a company to get the product through the myriad of regulatory barriers before it can go to market. Wouldn't it be great if we actually had an ombudsman for these startup companies to help them through this daunting process? As was mentioned earlier, according to Autumn Stats, in the U.S. institutions formed over 700 startups in 2012. 70 institutions reported over 15,000 jobs. That is true job creation. At UF, we've helped to start 12 to 15 companies every year based on university research. And instrumental in our efforts to do this has been an $8.5 million allocation of funding by the state of Florida for a matching grant program. Companies that license a university technology can apply for a grant of up to $300,000 and if they've already garnered funding from private investors. And this grant is only repayable at the time that the company either has a merger and acquisition, goes IPO, or has revenues of over $5 million in funding. Thus far, we've had 24 companies that have been funded and have averaged a 4x return, raising over $25 million in additional investment. The average salary in these companies is $74,000. If we could do something like this at the federal level, working collaboratively with venture capitalists and angel investment groups, I'm confident we could make some amazing things happen, because finding capital is one of the biggest challenges that these early stage companies face. And while U.S. institutions continue to license about 1/3 of our technologies to large corporations, it is these startups that are led by passionate entrepreneurs that are going to make the biggest impact on the economic health and vitality of our nation. The motivation of these individuals to be successful is powerful beyond measure. The more we can do to ensure their success, the more we do to ensure the success of the country's economy, healthcare, and national defense. One final note. Have you seen a calendar that I've left for you in your chairs? It features many of our startups and some fun facts about them. You'll notice there's not a single woman inventor featured. I see some head shaking. Trust me when I say it was not for lack of trying. The fact of the matter is, women and minorities are not participating in any significant way in the commercialization process, from invention to disclosure to patenting to startup companies. At UF, we've started a program called EWITS, which is empowering women in technology startups, to try to get more women involved in the process. Because according to the statistics, when women participate, the outcomes and return on investment is significantly greater. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into that, but I would love to talk about that topic with anybody who's interested. As President-elect of Autumn, the association that represents over 3,200 technology transfer professionals worldwide, please know that my colleagues and I are at your disposal. I implore you, please work with technology transfer professionals when you are looking to enact legislation or allocate resources, so that you will, in fact, get the outcomes that you are desiring. I'd like to conclude by showing you a brief video of one of our successful startups, because it truly demonstrates the real reason that the Bayh-Dole Act was created. Despite all the metrics that are used to measure technology transfer, the underlying principle of the Bayh-Dole Act was to commercialize research discoveries to improve the human condition. And that truly is the real measure of its success. Could we show the video, please?
University Research Discoveries, making the world a better place.
All I heard was, hey, Dr. Basil, they need you in the OR to see this patient, sciatic nerve injury, big soft tissue loss. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, it's probably going to be an amputation.
We came under contact near the end of our patrol. I happened to take a round to my left leg.
I've spent most of my academic and professional career looking at how peripheral nerves grow and why they don't regrow after certain types of injuries. Most of our work involves watching rodents recover, but the idea that this sort of work can then lead to rehabilitating nerve damage for military and injured people is great.
The trajectory of the bullet missed everything vital except his sciatic nerve, which is amazing.
We talked about my options. One of the big ones was amputation.
Below his knee, he didn't feel anything. He wasn't able to move his ankle joint. But looking at his leg, it's fully intact. So I started talking to him about the nerve graft, and Edward is a young guy, and he's just thinking, you know, give me the chance, I'll exercise every day. You know, amputation's not an option.
The ability to bring these to market and then to have surgeons trained to use these products, like the nerve graft, is essential.
To emphasize the point I just made, one of our startups, which Karen is the CEO, has developed, has commercialized a technology that was developed at the university, which is a ability to generate nerves. And there's a young man, Sergeant Edward Bonfiglio, who took 2 bullets to his leg in Afghanistan and was in the hospital. The doctors were going to amputate his leg, and he told them, "No way, Jose." And bottom line, the doctor got on the phone, found this nerve graft, and Sergeant Bonfiglio is not only walking and jogging again, but has served his second tour of duty back in Afghanistan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the CEO of that.
And our next speaker is, as Jane said, is Karen Zadaway. Karen is the CEO and president of Oxygen.
Good morning, everybody. A little bit about my background. I'm not an inventor. I am an engineer, undergraduate from Purdue. I went on and got an MBA and a business degree from Kellogg, but my role is in translation. And so it's working with inventors when they have that great idea to take it into becoming a product that in healthcare impacts patient lives. Today, I'm the CEO and president of Oxygen. Oxygen is first and foremost focused on improving the quality of life for patients with peripheral nerve injuries. It's probably not something you've thought about a lot before, but just like Edward, the wounded warrior, who had the risk of losing his leg because he had no function in the lower part of his leg, or a construction worker who needs the use of a hand to earn a living, or a mother who wants to be able to have sensation in her hand so that she can touch her child's face, see if the patient has, or the child has a fever, or even a patient who suffers from a painful neuroma as a result of a misplaced dental implant. All of these are peripheral nerve injuries, and all of these are conditions that Oxygen's portfolio of products can help surgeons improve the quality of life for those patients. Oxygen is the only company focused in the repair of peripheral nerve injuries. Our portfolio of regenerative medicine surgical implants includes the advanced nerve graft. This is the product that was used on Sergeant Bonfiglio. It is the only off-the-shelf commercially available processed nerve allograft for bridging those severed peripheral nerves. We have the Axoguard nerve connector, which is an invention out of Purdue that is an extracellular matrix that is a coaptation aid for the tensionless repair of, again, severed peripheral nerves. And then the Axoguard nerve connector, again, an extracellular matrix that provides protection for nerves that are injured. We believe that the peripheral nerve repair market is very large. It's relatively untapped in terms of treatment options, and it's ready today for innovative products to change the standard of care. Today, Oxygen is leading the changes in this peripheral nerve space. We're a public company traded on NASDAQ under the symbol AXGN. We provide products in the U.S. and a growing footprint in international markets. We sponsor the largest multi-center clinical study in peripheral nerve repair, and our products have been implanted in thousands of patients. But our roots are much more humble. We started in 2002 with a team of 4 entrepreneurs and a good idea. The team licensed patents from the University of Florida and the University of Texas, Austin, and then spent the next 3 years
getting the initial patents granted, using grant money in support of friends and family, to raise enough money to be ready to even approach the venture capital groups. For those of you not familiar with the venture capital process, it's painful. It's an arduous process to go through a vetting to determine whether an idea is going to be successful. The capital needs in medical products are very, very high. In a 2010 survey of medical device companies, the average total development cost to bring a low to moderate risk 510K product from concept to FDA clearance was approximately $31 million. For a higher risk PMA product, the average total cost from concept to FDA approval was approximately $94 million. Marketing and commercialization expenses can easily double these costs. Biologics and drugs are exponentially even more expensive. The trick is, if you're going to fail, you need to fail fast and not burn a lot of cash and time in determining whether a product and a company is going to be successful. The development cycle for medical products is long, and the average time from first FDA communication to approval of a PMA is 54 months. Every month of delay burns an additional $500,000 to $1 million more in cash. The venture capital funding process vets the best of the best to try and get the highest opportunity for investment success with the lowest risk of failure. The VCs typically look for a significant healthcare need, a high realizable potential market, a competitive differentiation of the technology and product, patents to provide barriers to generics and me-too followers, a clear regulatory and reimbursement pathway, and the people talent within the company to execute the plan. Even with this, the majority of startup healthcare companies fail, with less than 1 in 4 considered a success. I'm proud to say Axogen is one of those successes. Axogen received the first VC investment in 2006, and with this funding, jumped right into the incredibly hard work to translate an invention into a product. The development team worked night and day, completing benchtop testing and animal studies that are needed to show that the product is biocompatible and safe. We developed a consistent processing, packaging, and sterilization process, and solved just a plethora of technical challenges. We navigated the maze of regulations covering everything under the sun, from labeling, barcoding, packaging, sterility, documentation standards, even the different state licensing processes to be able to distribute a product in each state. We worked with surgeons and nurses to understand the user requirements and make sure that the product was going to be compatible with the hospital systems and meet the needs of the patients as the surgeons completed the surgery. We initiated clinical studies to monitor and evaluate the product performance. And of course, we developed a marketing plan and trained both surgeons and salespeople to be able to realize the value of the technology. It isn't true that if you build it, they will come. You have to be able to commercialize it and educate people so that they understand that a product is even available and the utility of that technology. We also ask for help from lots of resources. Every startup company is starved for resources, and small things can sometimes have very big impacts to help move the translation process along. The University of Florida has a biotech incubator to provide support to new companies, and this was extremely valuable to us as we got started on this process. We leased space from the incubator, and within 30 days, we were able to start development activities instead of wasting valuable cash and time starting up a lab. Networking has also been very helpful, and the incubator system helps to supply contacts and direction on resources. When the recession hit in 2008 and 2009, VC capital dried up, and we were faced with some difficult decisions on fundraising. I was able to tap into a network of CEOs and find what the public markets were like. And as a result of that, we merged and became a public company, and last August, again listed onto NASDAQ. That was very beneficial in charting our path to make sure we had the capital that we needed to remain viable. Today, I'm proud of the accomplishments of the Axogen team. The Advanced Nerve Graft was recently awarded a Product Innovation Leadership Award from Frost & Sullivan, and Axogen was 19th on the Deloitte 2013 Fast 500 list, a list of the technology companies with the greatest growth from 2008 to 2012. But the biggest accomplishment that we have is seeing the impact of the work that we have on patients' lives. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Pearl Huang. Pearl is the Vice President for Discovery Partnerships in Academia at GlaxoSmithKline.
Hi. There's the technology. Thank you, Joe, for inviting me to be on this panel, and for my colleagues here. It's been very enlightening for me. I think I'm the one person here from a big bureaucratic multinational organization, but yet everything I do is founded in academic institutions, and the ideas that grow both within our organization and in collaboration with our partners in academia are critical for bringing new medicines to the market for patients. A little bit about me: I'm 23 years in the industry. Most of my work has been in the field of oncology. I am by training a molecular geneticist, but by trade I'm a drug hunter. And so I've been privileged enough to work on projects that have been successful, that have brought new medicines to the patient. And so that experience is one I'm very grateful for, but also one I'm quite passionate about applying in other diseases for patients with unmet medical need. I have to say that while we had a statement earlier today from the congressman about how budgets are tight in government, they're equally tight in my industry. And if you look at the pharmaceutical industry over the last 10 years, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost, many in the R&D sector. And so I would say that we are a business that is in crisis. And one way of addressing it is to try to bring new ways of operating and new ways of working into our organizations. When things are tough, one of the things that you can do is collaborate, okay? Because I think the statement was made earlier that every dollar has to be spent in the most efficient way. And so we think collaboration is one way to maximize the value of our dollars and also yours moving forward. So I run a group called DPAC, Discovery Partnerships with Academia. We work in all geographies, in all disease areas, and our goal is to build a pipeline of novel medicines with an academic partner at the core of each project. So this program was started in the UK. It was born in the UK, and it has been successful enough there that the decision was made to expand it globally, and that's when I came on board onto this project. The partnerships are novel in that they actually require the academic to be a part of our drug hunting team, and they're also quite generously funded. So each project is funded for success to the tune of about $10 million US. Okay. We also have found that there are many other opportunities and ways to interact with academics that don't fit in the original DPAC construct. And so in the last year, we've expanded our activities to include funding of immature projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But also we started something called the Discovery Fast Track Contest. We ran this in the United States and North America in 2013. The idea being that motivated entrepreneurial academics who wanted to have access to an infrastructure that knew how to do drug discovery, had the tools, had the compounds, had the people and consultants available to gain access. And so we ran that contest successfully last year and brought 8 new projects, collaborators, and new disease areas into GSK. And those projects are actively being prosecuted right now. And finally, the other construct we've set up to enable our interaction with academics is we formed a partnership with a venture capital firm, Avalon VC in San Diego. And we operate we run these projects, and they operate just like a DPAC project in that the GSK provides in-kind resources and consulting, but the academics who participate in these projects are very entrepreneurial, and they say to us, we want to make a medicine, we understand that there's a benefit to doing it with you, but at the end of the day, we want to own something in a company. We want equity. And so by forming this relationship, we give those individuals this opportunity. Okay. So what does DPAC do? I think it's fair to say, and one of my colleagues has said it already, that many of the ideas that we see coming out of academia are still quite immature. So even for the ones that are the highest quality and still slightly mature, we need to contribute a significant amount of work to understand whether or not the opportunity can be translated into a therapy for a patient. And so the way the DPAC construct works is we stage the funding and the activity just as we would run a project inside of GSK. So there are discrete steps of drug discovery and development that are fairly canonical right now. And if you go to our website, www.gsk.dpac.com, you can see all of that. And I should also plug the website www.gsk.discoveryfasttrack.com because that describes the contest, which will run again in the United States and Canada in 2014, as well as in the EU and the UK. But what we do is we sit down with the academic and spend 3 months designing a work plan that will get us from wherever we're starting, whether it's an idea, whether it's a target, whether it's an assay, whether it's a compound, and what it would take for us to engineer that idea into something that could be tested in human disease. So what do? Well, usually what we do is we look at over 2 million compounds in our chemical collection to see if we've got, to make sure that we've got the best starting point for medicinal chemistry to optimize a compound. We set up dozens of biological assays that test the utility of a compound, the efficacy of a compound, and its characteristics. We do mechanism of action studies, and this is where the academic labs are extremely helpful to help us understand and to ensure that the phenomenon that we measure, what we see in the laboratory actually has a rational basis, has an explanation. And then we scale up the compounds of interest. We do toxicology, pharmacology studies, costing millions of dollars, and pick the compound that we think has the best chance for being safe in humans and for having efficacy in disease. And then we scale it up to the tune of many, many kilograms. We have to develop a process to do that. And then we, if we're lucky enough, we can formulate that and get it into a format that's available to the human body. So the majority of the engineering is done inside of GSK. We provide that in kind. But the novel ideas, the novel mechanism of action, the novel biological assays, and much of the problem solving is done in conjunction with, in collaboration with the academic. So we've started 10 of these full DPAC projects worldwide. 3 of them are in the United States. So right now, the majority of my pipeline is outside of this country. So I have to also say that we have reviewed over 1,300 opportunities. We keep track of this. We write down every one that we speak to, and we started 10. So 10% might seem depressing to you, but that sounds pretty good to me. I wish I could do 10%, but the reality is that most of these ideas are simply not ready yet. Okay. So in terms of what this audience can do to help me succeed and to help the others here move this technology forward, I'd say that for me, the focus on these early raw opportunities, which aren't quite ready for me, but still need to be developed, still need some attention, is an area of focus. So we have tried to seed this area ourselves by identifying several dozen of these and doing just seed grants. And we do them in an open innovation setting where we actually don't really care about the IP that's generated from the experiments that we fund. we care more about the information that comes out. So in fact, for Discovery Fast Track, in a contest where the winners get to run a screen with us, if the two parties decide not to work together after the screen is run, we only ask that the other party publish the results. We believe that that information is pre-competitive and it enables all of us to learn more, all of us to invent more further down the road. And if we could have more funding and more support for this level of activity in the with our academic partners, I think that would be extremely helpful and would enrich the opportunities that are available to us in the private sector. I think the last thing I want to say is I mentioned that the majority of my pipeline is outside of the United States. My title is Global Head of DPAC, and I don't succeed unless I deliver novel medicines to the clinic. And in fact, I really don't succeed unless I deliver to the patient. So we have found, I have a small data set, so this is what I'll tell you. When the DPAC contract is fairly complex, it is not a licensing agreement, it is not a sponsored research agreement, it is a collaboration where everybody puts a little skin in the game. Investigators commit time and energy from their laboratories. Licenses are put to the side, but intellectual property is generated during the course of the collaboration. We plan for success, so the IP that's generated is owned for the course of the collaboration by GSK. But if for any reason we discontinue the projects, all of it goes back to the academic and their institution, and they have majority ownership. We have found that this construct is quite attractive to people outside of the United States, but it has been a challenge for universities here to accept this model. It's not impossible. As I mentioned, we have 3 collaborations that we're very excited about here in the United States. But again, I think there's a lot of lack of understanding between the two cultures of academic inventors and private sector inventors when it comes to this space. So I'll stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Well, we've heard a couple of different perspectives up here, so what we'd like to do is spend the rest of our time taking questions from the audience, having discussions with the audience. So does anybody have a question for any of our panelists? Yes, sir.
We're in the House of Representatives, which is really appropriate. And the policies that you've been talking about, I think, would be agreed to by the House and its membership, certainly the congressman who is sponsoring this, the Senate, and the White House. They're all in favor of innovative research and support for it. This House passed, as Jane Muir mentioned, the Transfer Act, and it overwhelmingly passed H.R. 3309, the impacts of which would be absolutely inconsistent. So on a policy basis, inconsistency happens here, and it happens frequently. And with H.R. 3309, which is now being pasted together in the Senate, having been praised by the White House and the Senate leadership, we have a situation where politics is overcoming policy. And garage inventors and dorm inventors and startups and so forth are very busy doing what they're doing. The only chance to offset this has to come from the university. So this question is for the university people. How can we get universities to understand and execute on their political power is distinguished from their policy, which is hopeful, but all that input has come into Congress already, and yet Congress is ignoring it. So how can we get them to think more politically is my question.
Okay, we've got 3 universities up here, so go ahead.
Great question, especially being here. There has been kind of a joining of a number of major university organizations, APLU, AAU, Ottawa, a number of these that have been very involved in trying to say what the pros and cons of some of that legislation is. And I think that's very good. And most of these groups have strong government relations people that are based in Washington. I think it needs to go a little further. I've only just started to be involved in those issues, and I've got a complete full agenda today to go talk to a lot of people about this, some with Jane and a few others without. And I think it is important. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm very, universities tend to be risk averse, which is contrary to being an entrepreneur in many ways. And so, and when you're a state university, and maybe a mid-level state university, a flagship university, for example, you need to really think about where your money's going to be spent, especially now that tuition dollars are very critical. People want to have very inexpensive college degrees if they can. We want to get all these kinds of things. So to put money into something that would be risky, more risky now, to get everyone involved in inventing and patents, and then have them perhaps be considered a troll or be joining into an issue as a loser or something, where now you have a student inventor or something that gets something out of this. You got to remember, this is not Glaxo, where employees that patent something don't really own anything because it goes to the company. Most universities give about half of what they get to the inventors, to the faculty, to the students. So they're all very involved. And so you can't make them be at risk for things that a company that might license something down the road is going to be. And as we see, what we're very interested in, we see a lot of universities, I know Purdue, we heard about that, is very involved, is we're seeing a real increase in student invention. And we started a student incubator in our regular business incubator, and I didn't know what we were going to get. And we ended up we only had room for 16 student companies, and we had 40 applications when I first opened, of students that had companies that wanted to start and move into a business incubator. It was amazing. And it's just growing and growing, and we're trying to really enhance that, because there's different things. I gave a talk to the student government in our university. It might have been 50-odd people. That, these are the future senators and Congress people, and they really make their thing very interesting. And I said to them about patents. I talked to them because we were talking about seed money for things. They didn't know about patents. They didn't know about a lot of this stuff. But when I said to them, how many of you thought about starting a company? Every hand almost went up. It was amazing. The students are really something that are coming out of college these days. And they want to work for themselves. They want to be involved in these startups. We can't make them be at risk to these things as well. So, long answer, a lot of us now at the vice president's levels that might handle research versus government affairs are starting to get involved. Most of the National Academy inventors, we're going to start looking at this. Members tend to be more vice presidents of research, some TTO officers, and so I think we will be doing a lot more of this.
So you're right, this is a very scary proposition that there are not more universities yelling and screaming, right? And I don't have all of the answers, but I will say that you in the room, again, ask the practitioners. When asked, I think you will find overwhelmingly the universities will respond. They want to sit down, be at the table, have smart conversations so that collectively we can figure out how to raise the bar and do it in a smart way. I can tell you that as president-elect for autumn, this is a major topic of conversation. In fact, we have Dave Winwood in the back of the room. He's our Vice President of Public Policy. We are going to be doing quarterly webinars with the directors of the tech transfer offices to try to get them more engaged in the process, to better understand the process. It's daunting. I mean, what you all do is very complicated, and it's, those of us in tech transfer, we need to take time, as well as the universities in general, to try to understand it. But we're also combining the public policy initiatives with communications, because what we've found is that there's a core group of people in the tech transfer offices that are interested and understand it, but the majority don't. And so we're going to combine the public policy initiatives with a lot of efforts being put forth towards communications to expand that understanding and hopefully that engagement.
Well, this is a topic I've been very concerned about for several years, about the recent legislation and also the earlier America Invents Act, the one that I like to call America Doesn't Invent Act, because of its weakening of our patent laws and the effect especially on universities and small inventors and small companies. And it's a concern that universities need to be addressing. Your specific question is a tough one. How do we get universities to focus on it? I think Jane is doing a great job of getting the word out through Autumn and some of the other associations. You know, really key to all of this is really having universities understand the broader impact and maybe working in their regions with, elected officials so that those folks that work with them on economic development issues understand the impact to their communities if they're not going to be able to spin off as many companies. If those companies aren't going to be able to grow because the investors are not going to be as interested in those startup companies because the valuations are lower, because the IP is not as good. You know, there's a whole cascading effect down the road that will take some years to see if our patents are weakened once again, but it will happen. And so I think maybe the key is to, forge greater partnerships between our universities and the elected officials in our communities.
Jim Waddell is also here from the APLU, which represents the land grant to the universities. Jim, do you want to raise your hand and say anything? I'm sorry. He was chatting back. We'll try that again. I'm trying to hand you a softball. Jim's here from the APLU, which represents the land grant universities. We now have his undivided attention. Do you want to comment on this question about why are universities more engaged politically?
Well, I think there are layers of interest at universities, and I think we're trying to figure this out ourselves, both at APLU and also our sister association, AAU. We very much would like to have our presidents, senior research officers, and provosts understand the issues as well as the folks in our tech transfer offices do. And I think we have some work to do there. And we're looking forward to trying to work with folks like all of you to figure out how we can best bring these messages to our senior leadership at our institution and help them understand and carry these messages forward.
Thanks. And also remember, we could call on you at any time, so.
Good morning. My name is Neil Wasserman, and I just wanted to mention that I'm program chair for the Wharton Innovation Summit, which will be taking place at the end of April, and we'll be addressing some of the questions that you're raising here, particularly what are the characteristics of the ecosystem in the DC region that encourage innovation, make it possible for entrepreneurs to thrive, and one of the elements is the university participation in that. But I want to just ask a slightly broad question. If we were to identify the characteristics of a vibrant innovation ecosystem, we might divide it into the infrastructure characteristics, that is the financial capabilities, the university system generating potential innovation of people, the mentoring systems such as incubators. These are the elements of the infrastructure. And then there's another aspect, which are what are the behaviors, best practices, the behaviors that can be replicated and are features of this system, both within the innovator community and the support community. And if we were to identify those best practices and those elements of the infrastructure, the question is, how can we create a mechanism to replicate those characteristics from one region to another region, and in so doing, perhaps sustain more predictable and vibrant economic growth dependent upon the kinds of innovation mechanisms that you highlighted today?
That's a great question. Do anybody want to take a crack at that one? You can start the panel, but I bet you somebody will speak up.
Yeah, I I think that's part of what we work on with regions. And I think that there have been a number of best practice works that we've done and that others have done that speak to this. I think there are some federal initiatives that have tried to focus on that, like the EDA's I-6 program, that they had several rounds where they gave pilot funds to a number of different regions to develop the very regional ecosystem that you're talking about. Basically, by bringing together universities, industries, entrepreneurs, financial mechanisms, such as VCs, technology organizations, et cetera, trying to create that around the country. So I think there are some federal initiatives like I-6 that should be continued and that are trying to do exactly what you're speaking about.
Yeah, I would just add to that, I'm all about best practices, but you know, there's a saying, once you've seen one tech transfer office, you've seen one tech transfer office. And I think the same goes for ecosystems. Once you've seen one ecosystem, you've seen one ecosystem, because you know, there's so many differences that come to play. And so oftentimes, you know, why can't we do it like Silicon Valley? And everybody in the room knows there's so many regions, why not, right? So I would just say, you know, best practices are great, and getting information out there from all of these different ecosystems on what works is great. But at the end of the day, when we look at those best practices, we have to say, okay, which pieces of those will work in our particular ecosystem?
I'll just add to that, and I agree with what Jane said, that you have to adapt your model to your region. We are using, as a kind of a general model, the rainforest thinking, which is based on work done by Victor Long and Greg Horowitz, which is really many of the elements you mentioned, but it's really about how they connect together and how that system works easily. So if you want to look up that reference, it's based on a book issued in 2012 called The Rainforest.
And I'll comment on this too, using the prerogative of the chair. We have a decentralized system right now, and I think it's really critical to remember that the great thing about a decentralized system is you can adopt best practices, but if you impose a best practice on the whole system, it can be catastrophic. So I think one of the beauties of the system right now is it is decentralized, can be a little bit messy, but what works in one part of the region cannot be imposed on other parts of the region. So I think at least my message is value that and really look at what's going on in that area, bring best practices in, but don't impose them from Washington. The decentralized model, it's Jeffersonian, it doesn't look neat on a flow chart, but it beats the other models, because if a centralized model doesn't work, it's catastrophic. Okay, any other questions? We couldn't have stumped you. And one nice thing about it is you know that they're not wasting the taxpayers' money on heat here.
Hi, thank you all for your comments today. My name is Erin Waller, and I represent the Association for Women in Science. And as Ms. Muir touched on, women are heavily underrepresented in the technology transfer space, as well as underrepresented minorities. And so I'm sort of continually looking for programs that are doing a good job of attracting more women and minorities to this space. And I'm wondering if you guys have any comments on what you've seen that works or what you think the barriers are to participation.
It's great, and also we have a woman CEO here as well as women in tech transfer. So why don't you shout it out?
I was just going to comment that this is the first panel I've ever been on where there were more women than men. So interesting day for me. I'm sure Jane's got some very good comments, and I'll make sure I pass the baton to her, but I think for me, I would certainly say I experienced that at my age and position, I'm the only woman in the room most of the time. And that's been the career path that I've had. So my goal is to help with mentoring programs with students and other entrepreneurs to try and engage them in the process. And frankly, that's the help I got. So it's the best model that I've got. I think there are some areas that, and I'll let Jane talk about the program she has, that I think are more formalized, and I'm happy to volunteer, as most women that I see, in supporting those programs. So that's the
So, yeah, the program that we did, which was Empowering Women in Technology Startups, we did a lot of research, and the statistics out there, it's amazing, because on the one side, the lack of participation is just unbelievable, but on the other side, when you look at when women do participate, the statistics show return on investment, number of companies that go IPO is significantly greater, overall morale is greater. I mean, so, you know, from a just a pure economic standpoint, we need to figure out how to get more women involved in the process for the good of the economy, let alone just because it's the right thing to do. It's amazing that we've run this program twice. We've had over 100 women in it, and ewits.org is the website if you want to learn more about it. The testimonials, repeatedly, we get life-changing. That's what people are saying about it. And it's not that our great program is, you know, it certainly has room for improvement, but it's because it's a program that we specifically focus on women in startups. And there's not very many of those programs out there. There are a lot of programs that help women once they're in business or, you know, they're in management levels, but not actually getting these women just to think about being a part of a startup.
Oh, you want to say something about that too?
Yeah, I think I've had the same experience of being the only woman in the room. I was at JP Morgan earlier this month, and literally for 2 days I was the only woman in the room, and it was actually disheartening because I didn't realize it was such a desert. Also, within our organization, we mentor, I mentor. I'd say that there is sort of this valley of death when you move up into senior management in a large corporation for a number of senior women. That's a reality. And I don't know what the explanation for that is, but I do know that mentoring younger people and taking the time to talk to them and to ask them, you know, the hard questions about, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up, actually can be very effective.
I think on a federal level, one of the things that is being done and we could be doing more of is through the SBIR and STTR programs. A number of agencies have outreach for women and minorities, but I think we could do that more aggressively.
Paul, this is be dangerous ground, but you're certainly welcome to weigh in.
Well, no, I think it's such an important topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. I like being on a panel with a lot of experts too, but I think it's interesting. I think the mentorship one is a real key, and at our university, our tech transfer officer is female, our head of our incubator is female, and what I've noticed is a lot of, remember I talked about the student companies and things, there's a significant number that are female students now that are, you know, that are starting these companies because of mentorship, success, seeing people do these things and that stuff. So I think it's very important. And same with minorities.
I'll just add to the discussion that one disparity is in the investment community. By and large, most of the venture community and the investment community as a whole is very few women in that group. So that's one thing I think we need to work on. In New Mexico, we have a group called the New Mexico Angels, which is our local angel investment community. And they have started a program to encourage more women to join as investors. And I think that's an area, if we have more women participating as investors at the angel level, eventually in the venture community, I think that will also lead to more women running our startups.
I think we have time for one more question. Anybody else has another question? Ms. Mack.
Hi, my name is Karina Choi. I'm here from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I know many of you spoke to the fact of kind of maximizing the dollar that is spent in these inventions and commercialization, especially given limited resources. And Karen, you talked about if a company is going to fail, kind of make sure it fails early. My question is, how easy is it to determine whether a company is going to be successful or be a failure, and what are things that we might do to kind of increase the accuracy and speed of that decision?
That's an excellent question. I think just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be. You know, when a new invention is done, and this vetting process is very important. And for each one, of course, you've got to do an assessment, but it's look at the highest risk factors
for that invention and test those first. So obviously in medical products, one of the highest risk factors is always going to be safety profile and regulatory pathway. And so those are the things that we always focus on to say, is this, well, I guess in the last case, is it going to do what you say it's going to do? So get it in the hands of users, make a prototype as fast as you can, work out the regulatory pathway and see if there's precedent. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why patents are so important, because where there is no precedent and you're carving the pathway, the first mover makes enormous investments, both in time and dollars. And the second follower is to have the benefit of all of that. And without a patent, you end up sharing all the work that you did, that investment, with somebody else. It makes it very hard to get investors. So you've got to make sure that you've got that clear regulatory pathway, or that you've got a clear protection to be able to get a payback on that additional investment. Those are probably the biggest things that I would tackle first, because those are the things that knock you out. And then lastly, the reason companies fail is they run out of capital. And it's not usually because something doesn't work. It's good if you determine it doesn't work, go ahead and shut it down. But the last item is lay out a realistic plan and make sure you've got enough cash or access to cash to get to that endpoint, because you can get halfway through and you've got a great idea, but it doesn't matter if you don't have capital to execute it.
I would add that a lot of the chances of failing or succeeding are done before you even get started, right? And so it's a matter of picking the right projects and understanding what problems need to be solved in order to succeed. And so there's no crystal ball there. It's, can the problem be defined? And if it can be defined, then you figure out how much it will cost to do the experiment. You do the experiment, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, you stop.
And Pearl used my phrase, the crystal ball, right? So often we get, well, which of the companies are going to be really successful? Well, from a university perspective, we don't have that crystal ball, and there are so many variables. All the things that Karen talked about are from a company, right? Those are the things that the companies control. In a university, we can't control, what the entrepreneurs are going to, decisions that they're going to make. We can't control whether or not the VCs are going to choose to invest in those companies. We can't control if all of a sudden the market has a complete about shift. All that we can control is trying to find entrepreneurs like Karen that are willing to take the risk of licensing those technologies and doing all the things that she just talked about.
I think, as soon as you said that, it's a great question too in my mind there. I just think that it's what we try to deal with all the time is we have limited resources. How do we determine? I can tell you that before I came forward, I helped start a company that 25 years ago that became public, is still a company that's active and very active, and it still doesn't have a product out there. It's in a field it's very difficult politically right now on things. It's a stem cell field, but it's an active, vibrant company. So you don't know at what point things will happen. But to add to Karen's point, I think, and we just mentioned briefly there, management. And when we talk about university startups, we're not talking about ones, this is maybe even before the Valley of Death. Faculty are not trained usually they'll start a company, they'll get SBIR grants or STTR, they'll start moving forward, but it's really, in any company, management. You have great technology, but you don't have good management, you can go anywhere. So how do we find those managers for these really small companies in our incubators? How do we get these students to have some good mentoring with that? So a lot of us have started getting into our community to retired professionals, to these kinds of people to come and give back and take a role in these things.
Our friends at ITF were kind of actually filmed this. Matt, when will this actually be on your website where people miss this today, or folks want to see it again, where they can actually pull it up?
Later today, tomorrow.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to add? Before we adjourn, I would like to acknowledge Matt and the folks from ITF. This was a real labor of love. They put an awful lot of time into this, and we give a round of applause. And with that, we're adjourned.